Hi, I'm Kurt Broderson, the technology coordinator at Middlebury Community Television. You're watching Real Local, the show that is about local films, and we interview local filmmakers. And today I have a recent graduate from Middlebury College with me, Will Hanley, and he'll be showing us his senior thesis film, which is called The Sugar Bug, and we'll get to see that and then talk a little bit about the film specifically afterwards. But before we watch it, you just graduated, right? A month ago?
Yep, that's right.
Maybe tell us a little bit about your path before coming to the college, interest in filmmaking, what got you here to this point?
So I am a native originally from Baltimore, Flatlander. But I guess I really found my interest in film at Middlebury. I had done some production in high school and some, very amateur films with some friends, but wasn't sure that's what I wanted to do. And then took a film comedy class actually at Middlebury, and that sort of struck my interest and just grew from there.
When did you take that class? Right as a freshman, or was it?
No, this would have been beginning of my sophomore year. So I got a little late start to the film major.
When did you declare a major?
I declared my sophomore year.
Yeah, when I graduated from Middlebury in 1989, and there were no production courses. There were some film critique courses, but talking with a number of college filmmakers over the last few years, it's just been really sort of exciting for me to see where things have gone, and there's some great faculty there. Not so much from when I was there. Most of those folks have retired, but some of your professors have been in here talking about student films or films they've been involved in. What other kinds of film did you do at the college?
So, yeah, and just a testament to that, just in my 4 years, I feel like the film has really grown exponentially. But I started doing some fiction pieces. Then actually what got me into documentary filmmaking was I made a mockumentary in my first production class, and I felt like that was my most successful film. And it seemed like just documentary filmmaking in general was a good way to start to explore. I don't know. It felt easier and more manageable as a one-person team to accomplish a nice, solid, well-rounded piece.
So how much of this film did you? I know you directed and edited. Did you do all the shooting yourself as well? Or?
I did. Start to finish, it was all me. It was definitely a lot of work. I had a lot of help along the way from getting other eyes on the film and suggestions and things along those lines. But in terms of just traveling places and filming and editing and directing, it was all me.
How long were you working on it?
So this was my last semester, my senior year, and it was over the course of about 3 months. Most of the filming was packed into about 2 weeks, coinciding with the sugaring season. But I recently calculated how much I was driving, and I drove something like 250 miles in total around the state of Vermont.
How far away from Middlebury did you get?
I think the furthest I got was about an hour and a half.
Did you have your own car? Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't have a car. I had one early on, and then not until I think the end. So getting around was always a challenge at the college.
Yeah.
That's an amazing amount of work for one semester. I sort of assumed that you'd had the whole school year to work on it. And when did you first come up with the idea of the topic?
Well, I knew that I wanted to do something that was sort of like an ode to Vermont. I really, after 4 years, I really just kind of fell in love with the state and wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And then, I don't know, it seemed like sugar making was just something that's very characteristic of Vermont, and it seemed like a natural fit.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll try and cue it up here, and we'll watch it, and then we'll be back, talk about it, have more specific questions after the audience has had a chance to see it. So we got Will Hanley's The Sugar Bug.
I tell people it's a disease. If you do get attached to the disease, you're in trouble. It just takes you over.
I really got bit by the bug and just couldn't stop.
When you get the bug, the sugar bug,
It's like saps running in your blood. When the sun starts getting a certain height in the tree, it just feels like sugaring. And a sugar maker knows what I'm talking about. I have people come, they want 2 buckets. Got a couple kids. They want a couple buckets. I'll warn them. You want to be careful. I started out with 8. It's an addiction. Be very careful with it. How many people have come back and bought a small evaporator and some tubing and now are tapping 200 taps, who a couple years later will trade that little evaporator in for one bigger, and they're tapping 1,000 taps.
I've gone from, where I had 30 buckets to now 750 taps all in tubing and pipeline and vacuum and reverse osmosis.
So I hung 95 rusty buckets the first year and made a teeny bit of syrup, but I was kind of hooked. So from there it just grew, and then now we have almost 15,000 taps.
The objective has been pretty much since the beginning to make a little bit more, make a little bit more. And you want to make a little more than you made last year. You're always trying to take out the weak links in the chain to make it run smoother, and in the process make a little more syrup, and maybe better syrup.
We know that the Europeans who settled this area learned from the Native Americans.
It's believed that they used these hollowed out logs, and then they would heat rocks and they would put the sap in the hollowed out log, throw the heated rocks in with the sap, and that would get the water to boil, and they would keep repeating that over and over till they could actually concentrate it down basically to something like granulated sugar.
But that was quickly changed. The settlers began using metal spouts, metal buckets, metal pots to boil in. But before the Native Americans, probably the Native Americans learned by observing animals. So birds and primarily squirrels will go around early in the spring and nip little cuts in the bark of trees, and then it starts to ooze out sap, and the sun and wind dries it up and forms these sugar crystals. And then the squirrels or birds will go around and lick the sugar crystals off the bark.
The folklore also was that syrup came directly out of the maple tree. But the great creator, what he observed was that all the people would basically get really lazy, and they would just kind of sit around and just drink the syrup out of the tree.
But the maple god came along and said that this was too easy for you. That, we can't have you just laying around consuming maple syrup, not out there doing the hunting and the planting that you need to do to really keep us all alive.
And so he thought to make it a little bit more difficult for them, he would cut off the tops of the tree and water down the syrup in the tree.
And turn that maple syrup into a very light, hardly sweet water. And then he came back and said, there, now you have to work to get your sugar out of that tree. So it won't be quite so easy anymore, and you won't be lazy about it.
The overriding reason for sap movement in trees in the leafless time of the year or in the cold time of the year is to refill broken water vessels. Maple trees do it by having, during the freezing period, gas bubbles within each of these small fibers of the wood contracting. And that contracting creates a little small vacuum that pulls sap within from cell to cell to cell, and eventually fills up the entire tree. If you have a hole in that tree and it thaws back out again, the water is going to flow out of those vessels.
In terms of making the syrup itself, you collect the sap with some method, whether it's a bucket on a tree or tubing connecting the trees or whatever it is. And then you basically have roughly 2% sugar concentration in that sap, and to make syrup it has to be about 66.6% sugar. So you, in some way, remove the water. Traditionally, boiling it was the most common way of doing that. And now reverse osmosis can be part of that, or one step involved, but you're still boiling off that water, and also the heat of the boiling and the cooking of the sap also caramelizes the sugar to some degree, and that's what makes that distinct flavor of maple syrup.
And you can think of an evaporator as simply a very, very long pan, sort of like a gutter that's maybe 100 feet long with heat continuously under it, that you're pouring sap in one end and it's evaporating throughout that length and dripping syrup out the other end. And because you can't really work with a pan that long, 100 feet long, they bend it up.
Anywhere from 40 to as many as 60 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. If you think of a big barrel, like an oil drum, full of sap, would create 1 gallon jug of syrup. So during a season, we would probably get about 300,000 gallons of sap in a say 4-week period. And during yesterday's run, we were getting 1,800 gallons an hour. So, I mean, it can scoot right in here.
Typically, it's going to run for 2 months, middle of February through the month of March and through the first half of April. That's kind of in this area, that's pretty much our normal season.
People ask me, what do you do the rest of the time of year? Sure, I grow Christmas trees, but for the most part, when I'm done sugaring, I start getting ready for next year, for that little window that might only be 2 weeks long. It might take 3 weeks to tap in front of it, 2 weeks to produce it, 2 weeks to clean up afterwards. So it's say a 3-month segment, but the majority of the syrup will be produced in 2 weeks.
Vermont is an ideal spot because we're sort of in the sweet spot for maple trees, in that they grow very well here. Vermont in particular has been managed heavily for maple production, so we're actually, in terms of a natural forest, very heavily stocked in maple because of human intervention. And we also have the right climate, so we have a good number of these freeze-thaw days which drive the sap flow. Vermont has the highest utilization rate of maple trees and the highest production of maple syrup in the U.S., averaging about 1 million gallons of maple syrup a year. It would be hard to find someone in Vermont who didn't know a little something about maple syrup or think they knew a little something about maple syrup.
I mean, you don't have to go too far to find someone who lives here and has some connection to a sugar maker, either directly or indirectly, whether it's family or friends, or, you know, it's just part of that quintessential image of Vermont.
So this is the flavor of Vermont. It is an image of Vermont.
Regardless of where you travel in the world, when you mention Vermont, people immediately think of maple syrup.
It's been a great industry for me to be in. That's all I can say. I tell people, you know, it's a shame for me doing what I have done and having smiled all the way through it, enjoyed it. I feel sorry for anybody that worked in any place where they didn't enjoy what they're doing.
Not having to go off to work every day and work in an office and kind of be your own boss and that kind of thing. It just kind of was a logical fit. I'd like to think that as long as I'm physically able to do it, I'll keep doing it.
I will only stop when I physically am not capable. I know that when I go from this earth, my path, wherever it is, whether it's up there, down there, it's going to be a path into the woods, and there's going to be sugar maples there.
And worn out boots with laces that bend and fray, a pickup truck and a packet of smoking aid. My son's grown old, his mother's moved away, and I'm stuck here remembering better days.
Welcome back. So we were just watching The Sugar Bug by Will Hanley, who's here today. You're watching Real Local, and we're talking about the film. We didn't get into too much of the specifics beforehand. We didn't want to give away any of the film until you had a chance to watch it. But now that you know it's about sugar making, how did you meet the sugar makers? As a student, I didn't really have a big connection to the town, or certainly, getting up into the farms in the mountains. How did you make those connections?
Well, at the very beginning, the onset of this project, I sort of had two key connections. Some of it was luck, some of it was just being a little persistent. I met one of the most integral guys was this guy named Matt Davis, who's in the movie. I met him at a farmer's market, and I told him about my project, and he said, "Yeah, sure, come out to my farm." And then he ended up introducing me to a couple other sugar makers. And then the other one was a man named Bo Cleveland, who I actually went skiing at the Snow Bowl one day and was taking the bus back home, and just happened to sit next to him and told him about the project. And he's a chef at Middlebury College. And he said, "Oh, we have a person on staff who's a sugar maker. I'll introduce you." And that was a man named Bill Sargent. And he ultimately got me connected with a lot of people and was super, super helpful.
Yeah, because it seems like it's definitely a community of people where, it's not a competitive industry. It doesn't seem like from the outside. It seems, a lot of shared resources. And I figured once you meet one, then they'll introduce you to the next one who'll introduce you. Because you had a good range around the area, some further away, some real close.
Exactly.
And it's a great story. So did you get to, get your hands wet making syrup?
Not really. I did it like once or twice, but for the most part, I left it to the professionals.
So thinking of from a technical point of view, how difficult was it filming in those sugar houses where it's hot, it's 98% humidity? How was that from a filming standpoint?
Some of them were definitely worse off than others, and there were a couple times where I got a little nervous using all that electrical equipment with the steam, and I just kind of had to hope and pray. There's probably only one time where I had a scare with the camera getting super fogged up and was covered in moisture.
Yep. And you said before we watched it, it was about 2 weeks of filming, kind of condensed in
Yeah, I'd done some filming end of February and in March, and then a little bit like end of April. But most of it is due to the weather this year. The sugaring season was super late.
Short run.
Exactly. So it was just sort of condensed into 2 weeks.
And leading up to it, knowing that you had a fairly short window of time to do the filming, what pre-production work did you do ahead of time?
Most of it was simply conversations with sugar makers or farmers or people who knew something about the industry, just so that I could get a better understanding of what it is that they do and how I could approach it. I lucked out in some sense with the story and the concept of it being an addiction. That sort of fell into my lap. But most of it was just conversations. I went to some farms as well, and just sort of saw the process, and they would tell me how they would do it if there were runs and things like that.
And speaking of the sugaring as an addiction, that was a great start. And your film premiered at a kind of senior showcase of all the senior filmmakers, and the audience reaction to that opening section was just great. And there's something to be, I think, really said for watching a film with your friends and the audience reaction. I think they really enjoyed your film. So moving on now, you graduated. You're back home for the summer.
Yep, I'm home for now, and hopefully we'll see how it pans out, but maybe pursuing some more independent filmmaking. I'm hoping to do some traveling with friends, go on a road trip, hoping to potentially spend some time in Alaska as well.
Great.
And if some stories fall my way, I'll probably pursue them.
Now, do you have your own gear now to travel with you on the trip? Or?
I do not yet. That's step number one,
Yep.
which will be a pricey investment, but I think it's something that I got to do.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity. I mean, this summer I graduated from college. My best friend and I, that I'd grown up with, did a big Western trip and went to all the national parks. And I took photographs, but I would love to have video from that time, and just got to look at the photo albums.
Yeah.
So what other subjects interest you in documentaries? What might you approach?
I would say things that really explore people's passions, like the sugar bug. Before that, I did a similar one about a shoemaker. And just, I like exploring sort of like unique things about people and why they do them. And in the same vein, how that can be compared, although this wasn't explored in some of my other films, but how people have a lot of different interests like across the world, but a lot of like bridging people's differences, even though like through their passions. I think that's whether you're a sugar maker or a shoemaker, or you work in an office. I think sort of exploring that through filmmaking.
So we've got just a short time left. What kind of advice would you have for college students below you, or even younger filmmakers getting started? You said it was college that kind of introduced you to this. What advice would you pass on to the next generation?
If you are interested at all, I would just go out and do it as much as possible and learn from your mistakes. And that's how I figured it out, or I'm still figuring it out, really. Just go out and do it as much as you can.
Great. Well, thanks for coming, Will. I enjoyed watching your film. Now I've seen it a couple times. And best of luck to you. And
Thank you.
Hopefully I'll be seeing some more of your stuff in the future. So
thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for watching. And next time on Real Local, we'll be interviewing another local filmmaker and watching another local film. So stay with us. Thanks.